Greetings everyone, I hope you've had a good Easter. I want to play you this clip from GB News. It's a very odd clip because GB News had a segment a few days ago just as Easter was starting, and it was supposed to be a response to the Easter message given by King Charles, where the king for some reason felt it was necessary to mention Muslims and Jews in the message. There's no need at all to mention Muslims and Jews. They've just kind of been wedged in there unnaturally just to put them in, as you're about to see. But just to explain what happened here, so GB News, they had this segment. They invited on Dr. Gavin Ashenden, as they often do when they have a segment related to Christianity and related to the Anglican Church, because he was in the Anglican Church for a long time. He was a chaplain to the Queen. And they like to get his take, and it was essentially going to be his take on King Charles mentioning Jews and Muslims in his Easter message. So he's talking about Jesus, and then he goes on to say, the love he showed when he walked the earth reflected the Jewish ethic of caring for the stranger and those in need, a deep human instinct echoed in Islam and other religious traditions, and in the hearts of all who seek the good of others. So as I said, just sort of wedged in there. There was no need for it. He's basically saying Jesus, who showed a lot of love when he was in the world, did so just like Jewish people do, and just like Muslims do, and just like people of other faiths. It was done only so he could mention other religions. There wasn't really any need for it. It was almost as if the thinking was, if these religions are not mentioned in this Easter message, people of those religions are going to be offended. And they won't be. You think there are Jewish people going, oh, what? The king didn't mention Jews in his Easter message? That's outrageous. Same with Muslims. I really don't think they care if they're mentioned in the Easter message, so I don't know why there's this need to do it. Some people may argue that he's the king, and this is a secular / multi-faith country, so he can't just concentrate on Christianity. But then again, he is the head of the Anglican Church, and this is an Easter message. This isn't a message that the king is just delivering. This is an Easter message by the king who is the head of the Anglican Church. So he doesn't need to mention other faiths in this message, and yet he still does. So anyway, GB News decided to cover this, and as I said, they invited Gavin Ashenden on. And while the two presenters were listening to him give his take, suddenly, Tom Harwood on the left there decides to start going off on some weird anti-Christian rant, talking about how, well, generally it's accepted that Jesus wasn't born at the time that the Bible says he was born, and this census that took place, there's no record at all that this census ever took place.
This is a Christian festival, and it presupposes there are no differences that are essential between Christianity and Islam, but there's some very real problems. Last year, I think, over 4,000 Christians were killed worldwide by Muslims, and this isn't an isolated thing. This is an ongoing act of antagonism between a faith that follows a warlord and a faith that follows Jesus.
And yet, Islam does treat Jesus as a significant figure. Not as significant as they treat Muhammad, of course, but still as a great teacher, the teachings of whom they revere, and is part of their Abrahamic canon. Is that perhaps what the king was getting at?
Well, partly, but there's a problem with that. The problem is that the Jesus in the Quran and the Abraham in the Quran are not the real Jesus, and they're not real Abraham. Muhammad made them up. They're part of a figment of his religious imagination. And the reason they're not the same is they say things out of character. So it's true that Muslims respect a figure called Jesus. It's a fictional figure that Muhammad invented.
You could argue that the biblical Jesus is also a fictional figure. We know that the real Jesus was born in 3 or 4 AD rather than 0. And we do know certain things about the life of the historical Jesus that don't quite match up to the tales in the Bible.
You could argue it, Tom, but you'd be wrong. You'd lose the argument. Because actually, we have 4 different traditions that talk about Jesus. They marry in almost every single respect. The fact they don't marry in every respect suggests it's not been a text.
Well, we know that it's likely the real Jesus probably wasn't born in Nazareth.
No, it's not likely at all.
Sorry, not born in Bethlehem, was born in Nazareth, not Bethlehem.
It isn't at all likely at all. I mean, PhD scholars make up they make their reputations like I have a new idea which they then sell. There is no figure who's been more examined in history ever than the real Jesus. And nobody suggests that what you have in the Gospels is misleading, or except Islam, who say the thing has been faked at the end. Now,
but there's no record of a census that demanded people travel to their city of birth.
No, there is, really.
There really isn't.
There is. You've read the wrong book. Look, we can argue about this, but honestly, there is.
It was just out of nowhere. It wasn't on topic, because the topic was, here's the King's Easter message. He includes Muslims and Jews in it. What do you think, Gavin Ashenden? And he's giving his opinion. And then he suddenly just goes off talking about how parts of the Bible, according to him, aren't true. And you actually notice that the presenter next to him, I think her name is Emily, and I think she's a Christian, is kind of taken aback by what he's doing. She's like trying to play it off in a jokey manner, but she's thinking inside, what are you doing? Why are you suddenly attacking Christianity?
He's so argumentative today.
The people have tried to find historical evidence of a census that demands people travel, and they haven't.
We know you're not a believer.
And that isn't to say that you can't have a discussion about whether you think parts of the Bible are authentic or not, or whether you even think Christianity is authentic or not, but this isn't the segment to do it in, because it's got nothing to do with this. It was as unrelated to this segment as the King mentioning Jews and Muslims was to his Easter message. And what's actually happened is that this Tom Harwood has read an article somewhere by someone who said, well, actually, there's no record of this census ever taking place, and he's taken that as absolute truth, and he's started to run with it, and he's got Gavin Ashenden on, who I'll bet you knows a heck of a lot more about the Bible and even about the various scholars who have looked into it and the various historians who have looked into it. And he kind of brushes them off and says, no, you're wrong here, actually. There isn't any issue with this at all. But I think even he is surprised that this presenter, Tom Harwood, has even gone there. What was the point of this? Did he have some deep-seated anti-Christian bias inside him that he felt the need to just spew out during this discussion at Easter about the King's Easter message? It was a very weird thing for him to do, very unexpected. You know, he seems to have gotten his so-called facts from some weird sources, and it generally has been the case that whenever some kind of thing has happened to prove that Christianity is true, there have always been people sent out to meddle and to disprove it. It started all the way back with Jesus, really. When Jesus rose from the dead, there was a conspiracy, and the version that was supposed to go out to the people was that his body was stolen. But even since then, there have been many fairly strong pieces of evidence that suggest the truth of Christianity that have then been disputed by people, like the Shroud of Turin. That's another great example. The more we find out about the Shroud of Turin, the more it's looking like this is absolutely the cloth that Jesus was covered in from that time, and nobody can explain why this image looks the way it does, because it looks like some kind of light has gone through it. It looks kind of like a negative image, and some people already were sent in earlier to try to disprove this and say, oh no, this is from some other century. This isn't even from that time. And actually, when more tests have been done and this has been looked into deeper, it's turned out, no, actually, this is exactly from that time, and this is very likely to be the cloth of Jesus, the shroud. And here's another one that this presenter is exhibiting. He's read somewhere that there was no proof that this census happened, that actually Jesus wasn't born when he was born, etc., etc. These various people sent in to meddle, to confuse, and to basically try to convince people that this is a load of nonsense. And they go in there with the aim to convince people that this is nonsense. They're not going in there to try to look at this from a neutral standpoint. They're going in there to try to convince people this is nonsense. I don't really watch GB News at all, other than seeing the occasional clip online. But let me know what you think of this segment, and if you find this to be rather strange, the way this presenter reacted. Do you watch GB News at all? It's supposed to kind of be like the only right-wing/conservative news network in the UK, but I don't know how conservative it really is, or if it's just a network that supports the Conservative Party in this country, who are not really conservative. Thanks very much for watching the video, folks. Have yourselves a blessed day.